Come for the music, stay for the show. This is Dr. Randy Bach. I'm the president of the Newton Taxpayer Association, which you may not really get this, but it's in Newton, Newton, Massachusetts. And we are honored to have today a guest with us by the name of John Madfis, who's a friend of mine and a long-term and long-time advocate for people's rights in the cities he's lived in. He was born in Newton, Massachusetts. His dad, I believe, went to Newton High School. He went to Newton North High School after the division. And he's got a perspective about Newton, the city of Newton, where it's been, what it was like, what it is now. And I think he's going to be able to give us some historical perspective of where we stand. And you know, we're going to touch on taxpayer issues as well, because that's part of our name and our mission. So join us for the ride. John, happy to have you here today. Oh, let me give a further intro. So John has worked with real estate malls, and he has a real estate mind, so he's able to kind of address some of our, you know, taxpayer issues, which mostly what gets taxed in Newton is real estate. And he's also been involved with, you know, what we call, say, you know, freedom fighting, which is you know, keeping people's money in their own pockets, so you have freedom to spend it as you will, and other types of freedoms which he will elucidate. So John, tell us, what is a freedom fighter in Newton, and what type of freedoms do we all deserve and should have?
Well, one issue that I'd like to see is school choice. That the unions really bring a lot of pressure on the cities not to allow school choice. But I think if you're not happy with the school and what they offer, then you should be able to opt out and go to a school of your choice, using the same amount of money that was attributed to that school to the school of your choice. I happen to have two children who are both very artists, let's say, even though they're young, and the school did not really provide adequate training for them. And so both my daughter's son and my son's son went to charter schools that specialized in that
So where
area.
where did your grandkids go? Where were those charter schools?
They were in Los Angeles area.
Right. So, you know, I have some interest in this. I've had other shows that touch on this topic, and for some reason Newton has no charter school. So to have school choice here, you know, there's a thing called Hobson's choice. Have you heard of this?
No, I did not.
It's Hobson's choice is a little bit like exactly what we're talking about now. Hobson's choice is when you go, say, the school cafeteria and they're serving meatloaf, and that's that. And they say, what would you like to have for lunch today? You say, oh, I'd like, you know, chicken fingers. Like, well, okay, great. Here's some meatloaf. That's Hobson's choice. It's kind of the way you get to choose things when there isn't one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who Hobson was. Probably a philosopher or something like. Anyway, so to have school choice in the city of Newton is a distinction without a difference, because what do you get to choose from, south or north? You know, there's nothing set up like that.
No.
And I think you know, kind of a bigger question or issue would be, what is the stuff we're serving up? What's the meatloaf we're serving up? And could we disintermediate a little bit these kind of monolithic schools and make them akin to, you're a guy with real estate experience in shopping malls. People don't necessarily just want to go to one store that has one thing. They don't want to go to a huge Army-Navy store. They like to go, say, the Dedham Mall, because there's boutiques. You know, you can go to, you know, let's say you want to buy shoes. There's probably 6 different types of shoe stores you can go to. One like an Army, Navy, whatever. There's the Gap, this and that, and then there's, you know, higher price. You know, there's all different variants. I'm not going to get into shoes here, but with schools, the public schools are just this one thing. So how would you adapt and adopt this to our, you know, current model, and how would you change things and you know, bring some of your real estate kind of thoughts to this?
Well, I think the only thing that can be done is that we have to have the population be in favor of school choice. if you do, the teachers union obviously is very strong in Newton. They just conducted an illegal strike for 11 days that hampered a lot of students. All missed their February vacation.
And their families.
Yeah, and so they didn't follow the law, and we have a very pro-union state.
Yep.
Who did not want to challenge the school
Yeah,
teachers.
they got fines, and they're supposed to have accelerating, increasing fines. And apparently, my understanding is that one of the judges, the state judges, gave them like day-by-day accelerating fines, and then dropped it down again. So they were going halfway up a ladder, then they went back down to the first rung, as opposed to going and having higher and higher fines that would have given the impetus to come back. They were kind of given they were soft-pedaled in a sense. Not helpful.
Yeah.
So in this atmosphere, I think you actually make an excellent point. Oftentimes we can't change the people who rule us, but we can, since they're politicians and they want to keep their sinecures, they want to keep their jobs and spots and whatnot, we can change the thought platform upon which they work. So if we are stronger mentally and we give them the things, it's called, another term of philosophy is the Overton window. So I'm not sure who Overton was, and it's not really a window, but there's basically a set of things which are acceptable and people can talk about within that window. And that window can move and change. We see it happen over time, things that people can talk about. And if you start to put pressure on the concept of having these monolithic schools, we don't have monolithic items for anything else we do. We don't all go to the same vacation. We don't all pick the same sport. We don't all do the same thing for clothing or any other kind of lifestyle. We don't drive the same car or have the same, whatever. But with schools, everyone gets the same place. And I think this, you make an excellent point about the arts aspect, and I think the schools have some, kind of refinements within the schools, but I don't see why they all have to be in the same place with this one monolith. But they're not going to change unless people understand the concept thereof and how and why they should want it. So how and why should they want school choice?
Well, for that reason, I said that if they're not meeting the needs of their children, then the alternative should be school choice. I have two organizations that I'm a member of. I'm a political activist in that regard. There's an organization called Ed Choice, and another one, the Institute for Justice.
EED, Ed Choice.
Yeah.
And the Institute for Justice.
And both of them are big advocates of school choice and why you should let and because Massachusetts is a very pro-union state, they do not want to challenge unions. And so they let them get away with this illegal strike to a great extent and not bring enough civil action against them to close down that strike.
So are charter schools, say for instance, are those staffed by union teachers?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that they are. I don't think that they are, but I'm not positive of that.
So I would probably go a step further and do a voucher system. Charters are so these are all terms of art, but we pay city taxes, and then some of that money gets dispensed ostensibly per student, but it goes right to the schools. And the biggest part of the city budget, I think, and growing percentage-wise, is the schools. And within that, teacher salaries are an enormous factor. But I agree with you that there's kind of an aspect of, I keep coming back to this monolith kind of phrasing, that schools are, the cities are run by the schools. People kind of stay in these schools. I think they, to a certain extent, pick places to live based on the quality of the schools.
They do, for sure.
But I think they're somewhat handed a little bit of a bait and switch. I grew up in New York City, but my mom's sister and my cousins lived up here, and my grandmother and grandparents in the Boston area. And some of them lived in Newton, So we heard about how great Newton schools were. Safest city in the country, great schools, #1 ranked schools in the country. I don't think that, clearly
Time magazine did have an article that Newton North was the #1 school in the country a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. So maybe you can kind of draw on some of the history of what's happened to these schools. If they were the #1 schools in the country, maybe maybe that's something to kind of recommend, but I don't think that has remained the same. Maybe you can give us a little historical perspective on Newton schools.
Well, I
quality.
think one of the things about the schools do that a charter school would.
So that's not my phone.
Sorry about that. I didn't shut
So
that
we
off.
forgot to do the airline protocol of turn your phones and.
Yeah, I can't talk now. Bye.
Well, unless you want to take that call, put
No.
our. I'm just kidding. So let's go back to the question, historical perspective, Newton, relative quality of the schools. What's the city been like? What was it like growing up? And what are the differences? You didn't spend 100% of your time here. You were at some time in Westwood, but your kids, I assume, have had some Newton experience, and you
Yes.
did, and your dad did.
Yeah.
What's your overall kind of Mount Everest view of this?
Well, it's just a matter of freedom. That if the school does not provide what you want, then you should have the right to opt out. But the teachers' unions are so strong, especially in the state, that it's tough to go up against them.
Kind of circle back to the question. Is there a difference in kind of the quality of Newton schools from when they were number one in the country to now? And is it noticeable? And since you grew up here, what's your sense of the city? I mean, give us a kind of a historical perspective.
Yeah. That would be tough since my kids are not in school now, but to answer. But I think if you look how money is being spent educational-wise for the schools, there's a lot of staff and probably unneeded expenditures in the public schools that would not be in the charter schools.
Right. So when you went to, say, Newton North, and what was kind of what were the number of ancillary non-teacher staff visible to you back then, and do you notice any change now?
Well, I don't really know the answer to that because my kids are not in school now. I think the staff, and I have some numbers here of in spite of the fact that they didn't have enough money to they got a settlement, and that settlement did not necessarily pay for more teachers, but paid for a lot of administrative people that are part of the public school system that are not part, as I said, of the charter school system. So whether that is, my guess is you end up with a school system that's not quite as good as it could be because the charter schools are more interested in producing
Yeah. I think there's
a better product.
Yeah, no, I think there's feedback. I've mentioned the story previously, but not tonight. My kids went through the Newton school system, public school system, from elementary school, middle school, high school. Yeah, but at almost the same juncture for each of them, they were like, "Oh my God, we can't deal with these teachers, with the system." School. And there's different reasons. I'm not going to get into them. And they're different kids and whatnot. But somewhere around 9th grade, each of them were like, had it. And I can give you lots of examples of things where, well, basically, oftentimes there are teachers teaching because they are teachers, rather than knowing the topic. So there were junctures when, for instance, a science teacher was there teaching science because he or she had a teaching certificate, not because of any knowledge in science. Before, in the green room, we were talking about Albert Einstein. And my mom literally, when she was a teenager, walked him around Central Park, so forth. And they had family, mutual, her family were friends with Einstein. Literally Albert Einstein at that juncture or whatever, or today, if you had a modern version of him, he would not be able to teach science in public schools because you literally need a teacher's certificate to do that. So being a physicist or a scientist inventing the theory of general relativity, whatever, would not qualify you. So you could teach science being a French major as long as you had a teaching certificate, because they think the pedagogy is important, the method of teaching is important, and then you just matter of I guess it's a little bit like a waiter. There's stuff already cut up, and you serve it to all the kids, as opposed to being the chef who knows how to serve up the science and bring excitement. So I think they got frustrated because a lot of the subjects were being taught by people who not necessarily. Some of them were. There were some great teachers. Each one had a teacher throughout their careers that they really liked. Okay, there's some great people there, but oftentimes there was this mismatch, and some teachers were depressed, and they weren't showing up for work. There were a lot of substitution, but there's no method of kind of like holding their feet to the fire, of holding them to task. And at private schools, and in both occasions, they went to look at private schools, and it was a different animal, because there's, in my view, there's some accountability, and teachers have to perform because people are paying them in a direct way, as opposed to this indirect through the city way.
Well, it's very difficult to get rid of teachers who are not good teachers because of the unions. I remember when I was in high school, there was a female teacher, and she could not control the class. So we would all, if there were girls playing field hockey outside, all the guys would yell, "Hey, let's go look out the window." She could not control the class whatsoever. And the teachers union, because of their power, couldn't get rid of people like her. There was no firing incompetent teachers. So if you had an incompetent teacher, so what? It didn't matter.
Yeah.
And I did forget also to mention that my daughter was really a terrific artist, and she left Newton schools and went to an art school in Natick.
Did you pay for that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that's the
so
thing.
I had to pay extra.
Yeah, no, I get it. And that's kind of a burden. I mean, we've talked on previous episodes about the COVID experience, and during it, and I think began slightly before, but during COVID and thereafter, Newton City schools have lost 1 in 7 students, and that's while producing a product that is essentially free. It's not free to make, but it's free to those students at that time. If you show up yesterday and wind up in Newton renting, so forth, your kid goes to school for free, whatever the legacy of taxes and so forth that come in, and so it's a free product, and 1 out of 7 of the kids' parents decided, you know what, free, we'll spend $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 extra, aside from the money we pay to live here for our home, for rent, taxes, whatever. We're going to pay that extra on top of it because our kid is not getting anything worth even free. And so, you have to ask yourself what's going on. And we've talked about overrides and whatnot. They right after COVID, a year ago, they asked for an override with a declining product, with a product 1 out of 7 people are not taking for free. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that? You've been through a few override campaigns yourself, correct?
I have, yes.
What are your thoughts about those?
I think they were all worthwhile causes. That as I said, because we have such a pro-union state, that they'll stick up for the teachers no matter what. Even I don't know, I think they were fined something like $625,000 for the strike of 12,000 students were into chaos.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I don't think they had to pay that.
Well, even insofar as they might, it's actually going to be covered by the national.
Yeah.
By the NEA, the National Education Association. We always, on a side note, we always see this. Support our educators. It used to be teachers, but now the signs all say educators, which I suppose sounds better than teachers. But I went to public school in New York City, and back then, 1,000 years ago, we pretty much, I spent time in the front office because I had a task to, do this kind of like stuff, kind of administrative stuff. I was ringing the bell for recess and all that kind of stuff. And so in and out, I saw pretty much the staff and we had teachers, and we had like a principal, a vice principal, a nurse, a janitor, maybe 2 janitors, and that was it. And there was one teacher per 30 kids or so, and everyone seemed to learn how to read and whatnot. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was a big, I don't think people were worse. I think literacy was probably better back then. Mm-hmm. But now, if you look, and don't take my word for this, people at home, just go to any of the school's websites and look at staff, and it's an enormous list. And I know people think they're getting more. They're getting all this, occupational therapy. They're getting, there's more medication for ADD. There's all kinds of things layered on. We didn't. I don't know. I assume we had human beings similar to now. We didn't have these diagnoses. We didn't have kids medicated. We didn't have kids on antidepressants. There seems to be a lot more kind of fractionalization and kind of medicalization of the students. Totally separate story. Mm-hmm. But the number of staff on school premises is just enormous versus just the teachers. And somehow, again, we made
and that has increased tremendously too, of the non-teachers working in the schools.
Yeah.
And in spite of the fact that they had the strike and supposedly needed more money and all that, a lot of it went to non-teaching positions. So the biggest thing we really need is competition to show that the best product is what your child wants. And with like my daughter, who was quite a good artist, and now has a TV show in LA, and is a big influencer. Mm-hmm. And so she was quite talented person. And as I said, her son also, she took the son out of the public school, and he's in a charter school too.
Right.
Because they're both talented, and he's like 7, but he's an incredible artist at 7.
Yeah. So my boys, they both graduated from Newton North, and I have to say, when they went elsewhere, you kind of saw what Newton North may not have been bringing to the table. So my older son, he wound up going to one of the last all-male colleges in the country, Hampden, Sydney. And a lot of people are curious about the reason for that. And he liked the visit there, but there was a ability to have kind of open dialogue. They would debate every topic, mm-hmm. and every topic they had to prove in discussion. They couldn't just hand something in. I mean, these days, so much is done by AI, but that was before AI was a thing. And you'd write your test, you'd maybe fill in the blanks, hand it in. But at Hampden Sydney, that certainly they do that, and mm-hmm. you have to have tests and you have to pass things in. But everything was adjudicated orally. They had mm-hmm. to discuss things. So if you had written a paper on the Civil War or something like that, it wasn't enough just to know the names. They would have you kind of talk about your concept of what this battle meant, or whatever. I'm not going to go through details. But he came back after one semester of Hampden Sydney, and he was I mean, maybe it was just a coincidence, but we were blown away because he was talking in full kind of comprehensive, cohesive ideas about events. And his whole take, he just became so much more interested in current events. And he's got a job and whatnot, but he also has a couple podcasts on the side. And they're hugely in depth. I mean, I recommend people can write to me and ask what they are. But, kind of this didn't happen from high school. Mm-hmm. He got things from high school. I have to say, one of the things he got the best from high school was being on the wrestling team. I think that taught him discipline. That he wasn't getting in the classroom, but the class themselves, I don't think they were challenging him. Yeah. And maybe they just, I don't think they have the urge and the impetus to make you the best, and so forth, that you do in a private institution.
Yeah. You don't think they do have the ability to make them
in a public school?
I thought you said
I just think in general, if you put public in front of a word, I went to the private swimming pool, I went to the public swimming pool. Now, mind you, they fixed hours, it's a little bit nicer right now. But public transportation, private transportation. If you have public schools, private schools, for the most part, the word public, I mean, it's an interesting thing that it's free and accessible and all kind of stuff. But generally, the quality level of public transportation, private, it's never going to be as good.
Yeah.
Because they're dealing with a different sensibility to just have the thing there that everyone can kind of get to it.
Yeah.
And I just, I think what we're talking about and what you're talking about is a way of crafting this. And this would take an endeavor. So how do we get to there from here?
Well, we have to have politicians who will support school choice. I mean, school choice is, we have a free country. And you should, if the school doesn't meet your needs, then you should have the right to take that money that's devoted to that school and use it for the school that meets the needs of your
Would
child.
that include private schools?
Yes.
So you're talking
think-
of a voucher system then?
Yes, I think a voucher system would be the right direction. But as I've said earlier, the unions are so strong, and the political people in office don't want to go against them. I mean, I have one thing it said here that school pension costs have doubled over the last 10 years, from $500 a student to $1,000 per student. Those are problems that would not be existing in the charter schools.
Yeah.
But they have a strong union, and as I said, that woman teacher I had, Mrs. Perlman was her name, could not control the class.
Right.
She should have been fired, but you could not fire. Basically, it's very, very difficult to fire a teacher.
Yeah.
Even within
No, it's a funny thing.
incompetence.
People, the Boston Globe was all over the cardinal law, pedophile priest scandal, and they were like, "Oh my God, you were shuttling these guys from place to place." And I'm not going to make accusations of the same nature, but what happens in the school system is not that different. I mean, well, let's leave the crimes aside, and it's not to say that pedophilia never happens in the schools, but let's just say it's a different animal. The concept remains that it's impossible to get rid of that person. Why didn't the Catholic Church just get rid of those guys, excommunicate them or whatever, or do whatever they had to do till they were fixed?
Yeah.
They don't have a union, but they have the conception of a union, that they're all in this together, they're part of a band, so forth. The unions literally have a union, obviously,
Yeah.
and they're going to do things that will keep that together. That is, definitionally, union means together, one. So I think it's a tall challenge, and for people to want it, again, I think the Overton window is to get the politicians to want that and make that happen. Hopefully it'll happen certain places, and people tend to gravitate, they flock, places, they vote with their feet, as it were. So in real estate, if you have a product or a mall that's substandard, what happens to that mall?
It closes up or converts to something else.
So if you had a mall
To a pickleball court.
right? If you had a mall or a store where 14% of the customers disappeared within a year of their finding out the actual stuff that's in the store, what would happen to that store?
It would close up and go out of business.
If it were a public school, what would it do?
Spend more money.
It would spend more money. It would ask for more money in an override.
Right.
And when it didn't get that money, it would find some under the couch someplace.
Yeah.
The $7 million that they asked for in override, they found somehow.
Yeah.
So our message to you, taxpayers, is to join us. We're on Facebook. It's Newton Taxpayer Association, pretty easy to remember. And I'd like to hear from you. Please help join us and bring the fight. Any final words, John?
No, just fight for freedom. I mean, this is a freedom issue. You should be able to have your child educated in the manner you want, and if the public schools are not doing it,
we have 1 minute left. What about homeschooling?
I think homeschooling would be okay too.
Yeah, I got to say, I have a medical school classmate of mine, and I happened to run into him in Newton. I mean, we were in Rochester, we did a lot of other stuff between, and then boom, I see him in Newton. And where do your kids go to school? We're homeschooling them. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. I wasn't really on board with that concept then. What about athletics? Well, they did the athletics in the schools, and everything else they homeschooled. And these kids went on to like super, top schools, Harvard and whatnot. Yeah. And if you meet them, they were like more eloquent, more put together than a lot of the, my kids' cohort.
Yeah. So I think that's.
So I think there's a lesson there. I want all of you to homeschool on this topic and come back, and we're going to be testing you very soon. So thank you so much for joining us. Newton Taxpayer Association's Taxpayer Talk, July 22nd. Come back next month, and we're actually going to talk with the superintendent, Anna Nolan. And so have your questions if you want to give me some in advance that I can ask her.
Okay.